I once asked Jaguar Wright why Beyoncé changes so drastically on stage. Her response sent chills down my spine. "That's Sasha," she said. But it was not just a simple answer. It was a warning. What I learned that day about Beyoncé's transformation on stage revealed something far darker than anyone could ever imagine. The truth behind Sasha Fierce is far more terrifying than you think. What Beyoncé truly gave up for fame is a secret so disturbing it will haunt you forever. I met Jaguar Wright years ago, long before the rumors and whispers surrounding Beyoncé's transformation on stage became public. I had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The way she seemed to change when the spotlight hit. The way she moved, spoke, and even became someone else. But I never truly thought much about it until I asked Jaguar. It happened one night backstage after a performance. Jaguar was there, just standing off to the side, observing. She had this way about her, calm yet intense, as though she could read the energy of the room like a book. I was intrigued by her, always had been. So when I got the chance, I approached her. "Why does she change so much when she performs?" I asked. I was talking about Beyoncé, of course. Everyone knew about the dramatic shift she underwent on stage. It was something you could not miss. The persona that emerged was electric, commanding, and unlike the Beyoncé we saw off stage. Jaguar's eyes narrowed when I asked. For a moment, she did not say anything. She just stared at me, as though considering how much to reveal. She was not like most people in the industry who would answer questions just to be polite. No, Jaguar had a certain aura, a sense that she knew things others would never dare to say out loud. Then, with a quiet, almost eerie calm, she spoke. "That's Sasha," she said. At first, I thought she was just referring to the well-known persona Beyoncé had created for herself. Everyone knew Sasha Fierce was her alter ego, but there was something in Jaguar's voice, a tone that sent a chill up my spine. It was as if Sasha was not just a stage name, but something more, something that did not belong in the realm of performance. I pressed her further, trying to understand what she meant. "What do you mean? That's Sasha?" I asked, my curiosity growing. I was expecting a simple explanation, a response about the persona, the artistic choice, but what Jaguar said next left me speechless. "You think it's all performance, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not just an act. Sasha's not just a part of her. Sasha is her." The way she said it made my skin crawl. I wanted to laugh it off, to say it was just Jaguar being mysterious, but something in the way she looked at me made me stop. I knew Jaguar had seen things that most people would never understand, and the fear that flickered in her eyes told me this was not something to take lightly. "She made a deal," Jaguar continued, almost as if speaking to herself. "And Sasha's the price she paid." I had no idea what she meant at the time, but I knew I wanted to know more. I had to. There was something off about Beyoncé's on-stage persona, something otherworldly that no one was talking about. Jaguar's words haunted me, stayed with me long after our conversation ended. I had no clue just how deep this rabbit hole would go. What Beyoncé gave up for fame, what she became, was a price far greater than anyone could imagine. But what Jaguar said next would make me question everything I thought I knew about Beyoncé, and everything I thought I understood about fame. The conversation with Jaguar weighed heavily on me. The unsettling thought that something deeper than a mere stage persona lurked behind Beyoncé's transformation. She had been vague, almost too vague. but there was something in her eyes, something that told me she knew more than she was saying, and I had to know more. I could not let it go. Weeks passed before I saw Jaguar again. This time, it was at an event, a quiet after-party that felt more like a gathering of secrets than a celebration. The tension in the room was palpable, as if everyone was aware of some hidden truth, but no one was willing to speak it aloud. Jaguar, as always, stood apart from the crowd. She was an observer, a silent figure in the background. I approached her, my heart pounding, and asked, "What did you mean when you said Sasha was more than just an act? What is she?" Jaguar looked at me, her gaze piercing. She seemed to hesitate, almost as though she were debating whether or not to share what she knew. But I could see the weight of the truth in her eyes. She knew I was not going to drop it. Not now. Not after everything I had already heard. She sighed, a heavy, almost weary sound, as if the burden of the secret had taken a toll on her. Sasha's not just a persona, it is a force, a presence. Beyoncé made a deal she thought was temporary, something to push her career to the next level. But what she did not realize, what none of us realized, was that it would change her forever. Her words hung in the air, thick with the gravity of the revelation. I wanted to ask more, but I had a feeling that doing so would only open doors I was not ready to walk through. But I had to know. I pressed. "What do you mean a deal? What kind of deal?" Jaguar took a deep breath, and in that moment I knew she was about to share something that would shatter everything I had ever believed about the music industry. She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering as if she were afraid someone might overhear. "She met someone," Jaguar began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who promised her fame beyond her wildest dreams. All she had to do was make a sacrifice, a small price in exchange for all the success she could ever imagine. At first it seemed harmless, just a ritual, something she thought was a mere formality. But the power it gave her, it was intoxicating. I could not believe what I was hearing. A sacrifice? A deal with someone? Or something supernatural? It sounded insane. Yet Jaguar's face was so serious, her expression so grave, that I could not shake the feeling that she was telling the truth. "The deal was with a force," Jaguar continued. "An ancient one that had been lurking in the shadows of the industry for years. It gave her power, influence, fame like no one had ever seen. But in return, it demanded something more than she ever anticipated." She paused, her eyes darkening. It took a piece of her soul. I could feel my heart race in my chest. "A piece of her soul?" I repeated, barely able to comprehend what she was saying. Jaguar nodded slowly, her gaze distant, as if reliving the moment herself. "Beyoncé thought she could control it. She thought it was just a temporary thing, something she could shake off when it was done. But it was never meant to be temporary. The force, the entity Sasha, it took hold of her, deeper than anyone knew. And once it was in, it was impossible to get out." The chill in her voice sent a wave of dread over me. I had to ask the question that had been gnawing at the back of my mind. Is Sasha something that Beyoncé created for the stage? Or is she something else? Jaguar's eyes darkened even further. Sasha was not created. She became Sasha. And that's where it gets dangerous. The deal, whatever it was, transformed her. She was not Beyoncé anymore, not entirely. Sasha is not just a character. She is the manifestation of the entity that took hold of her. Every time Beyoncé steps on stage, she becomes Sasha. But in doing so, she loses a little more of herself. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, the reality of what I was hearing starting to hit me. This was not just a story about an artist and her stage persona. This was about something much darker, something that controlled her very identity. Jaguar's voice was barely audible now, almost as if she were afraid to speak the next words aloud. The worst part? Beyoncé did not realize the cost at first. The entity took pieces of her soul with every performance, every show, until one day, she would have nothing left. And that day, it is closer than you think. I stood there, stunned, unable to process the magnitude of what she was saying. I had never imagined the music industry, the stars we admired, could be so steeped in something so dark and sinister. But here I was, hearing the truth. Beyoncé, the icon, the legend. She had sold her soul for fame, and the price she had to pay was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. As I left the conversation with Jaguar, her words replayed in my mind. The price of fame was higher than anyone realized, and the cost Beyoncé had paid was more than just her success. It was her very essence, her soul. But the true horror of what Beyoncé gave up for fame was far darker than I had ever imagined, and the price she is paying now. It is only just beginning. Jaguar's words echoed in my mind for days after our conversation. The more I thought about them, the more I realized just how dangerous this secret was. It was not simply a backstage revelation. It was a truth that had the power to unravel everything I had believed about fame, about success, about the people we worship from afar. I had never thought that fame could cost so much. This much. I could not get the image of Beyoncé's transformation out of my mind. The way she seemed to become someone else when the stage lights hit. It was as though she was invaded, her personality slipping away, replaced by this otherworldly presence. It was unnerving, to say the least. But it was the price of success, right? Fame came with its sacrifices, or so I thought. But after hearing what Jaguar had shared, it was clear this was not just the usual sacrifice that everyone in the industry made. This was something deeper, something far darker. And the scariest part? Beyoncé had not realized what she had truly agreed to. She thought it was a temporary deal, just a stepping stone to her success. But what she had unleashed was not something she could control. Jaguar had told me that the entity Beyoncé made a pact with, this supernatural force, had been lurking in the shadows for years, feeding off the energy of those who sought fame and power. It had lured countless artists with promises of greatness. Some, like Beyoncé, only realized the true cost too late. For others, they had already been consumed by it. The entity's power came from the fame it could draw in, the energy that pulsed through an artist's success. But it was not a force that could be dismissed once its hold was taken. No, the entity had claimed its victims one by one, and it had set its sights on Beyoncé. I could feel my stomach twist as I thought about the true cost of Beyoncé's fame. It was not just about what she gained. It was about what she had to lose. Jaguar had said it herself. With every performance, every show, the entity took a little more from her. And in return, Beyoncé's success grew larger, her fame skyrocketing. The more she gave, the more the entity consumed. It was a vicious cycle, a feedback loop that could not be broken. Not until everything was gone. The idea of losing oneself for fame was not something new to me. I had heard the stories, countless stories of artists who had given up their privacy, their peace, and sometimes even their mental stability to climb the ladder of success. But this was something different. Beyoncé's transformation was not simply a byproduct of fame. It was the result of a malevolent force, feeding off her energy, pulling her into a spiraling descent that would end in her total loss. And yet, she had no choice. She could not escape it. Beyoncé's life had been irreversibly tied to Sasha, to the entity that controlled her. I could not help but wonder, how far could it go? How much longer could Beyoncé keep her identity intact before Sasha completely consumed her? Jaguar had said something else that stayed with me. Beyoncé thought she could fight it. She thought she could keep control. But she was wrong. Those words haunted me because I could not imagine someone as strong as Beyoncé losing control. We all saw the powerhouse she was. The performer who could command a room with a single look. The woman who exuded strength and confidence. To think that all of that was simply a facade, a mask put on by the very entity she had made a deal with, was almost too much to comprehend. But Jaguar's warning was clear. Sasha was not just a stage persona. Sasha was something else, something dark. And Beyoncé was not merely playing a role. She was being controlled. Every time she stepped on a stage, it was as if she was being taken over. There were moments when she would come off stage, drenched in sweat, her face drained of color, as though she had just fought a battle. She would collapse backstage, exhausted, only to wake up and have no memory of what had just happened. I asked Jaguar once, what happens when Beyoncé can no longer control Sasha? What happens when it takes over completely? Jaguar's face darkened. I do not know, but I can feel it. It is getting worse. She cannot keep fighting it forever. The idea of Beyoncé losing control, losing herself, was too terrifying to fully comprehend. I thought about the last few years of her career, the way she had evolved, how she had become this larger-than-life figure. But behind the glitz and glamour, there was a truth darker than I had imagined. The stage was not just a place for Beyoncé to perform. It was the battleground where she fought to hold on to whatever part of herself she could. The price of fame was not just the years of sacrifice, the toll on her relationships, the isolation. The true cost was her very soul, piece by piece, slipping away with each performance. It was a price that could not be repaid. And now, Beyoncé was trapped. Every show, every performance was a step further into Sasha's world. It was a world where Beyoncé no longer had control. It was a world where the only thing that mattered was the entity she had invited into her life. The deal was made, and now the consequences were unfolding before our very eyes. But even as Beyoncé lost more of herself, the entity grew stronger. In the moment she thought she had found a way out, everything would change. As I dug deeper into the truth behind Beyoncé's transformation, the more I realized just how much control the entity, Sasha, had over her. What started as a simple performance persona had turned into something much darker, something much more dangerous. The moment Beyoncé agreed to the deal, she unknowingly bound herself to something far greater than her own ambition. And the price she was paying for fame was becoming more terrifying with each passing day. I had always admired Beyoncé's strength. Her presence, both on and off stage, was undeniable. She commanded attention. She owned every stage she graced. But what I did not understand, what none of us truly realized, was that what we saw was only a shell of who Beyoncé really was. The real Beyoncé was slipping away, piece by piece, and in her place stood something else entirely. Jaguar had been right about one thing. Beyoncé's struggle was far from over. But what Jaguar did not say, what she had only hinted at, was just how close the entity had come to fully taking over. Every time Beyoncé performed, the line between who she once was and the force controlling her grew blurrier. Sasha had become an insidious part of her being, something Beyoncé could not escape no matter how hard she tried. I spoke to a few people who had worked with Beyoncé in the past, people who had seen the changes firsthand. They confirmed what Jaguar had said. Beyoncé's transformations on stage were not just an act. There were moments, they told me, when Beyoncé would go completely blank during a performance, as if her eyes were not her own, as if Sasha had taken over completely. One source described how they had once caught a glimpse of Beyoncé backstage before a show. She was pacing, muttering to herself. When they approached her, she turned abruptly, her eyes wide and unrecognizable, almost vacant. They asked if she was okay, but she did not respond. It was as if she was not even aware of her surroundings. Then, just moments before she was due to go on stage, she seemed to snap out of it. Her eyes focused and her face hardened into the confident, unstoppable Beyoncé we all knew. But the moment passed quickly, and it left the person who witnessed it unnerved. This was not just a performance persona. This was a manifestation of something real, an entity that had control over her, an entity that had slowly taken root in her life, turning her into a puppet of its will. The fame she so desperately craved, the power she had fought for, had come with a cost that could never be undone. And what was even more horrifying was that Beyoncé was not the only one who had fallen victim to this entity. There were whispers, rumors of other artists who had been taken by similar forces, their fame built on deals with supernatural beings that demanded sacrifices in return. Some artists, like Beyoncé, had made the mistake of thinking they could control it, that they could manage the power. But the truth was far more sinister. The entity had no intention of being controlled. It only took what it wanted, and the more success it fed on, the stronger it became. I remember the first time I saw Beyoncé perform after speaking to Jaguar. It was a few months later, and everything I had learned about her transformation weighed heavily on me. Watching her on stage, I could see it, the shift in her eyes, the coldness that settled over her once she became Sasha. It was as if she was no longer there, no longer in control. The person who stepped onto that stage was not the Beyoncé we knew. It was a vessel, a conduit for something darker. And off stage, the effects were just as chilling. Those close to her spoke of how she had become more distant, more isolated. It was as though she was slowly losing touch with reality, unable to distinguish between who she had once been and who she was becoming. I spoke to one of her former close friends who admitted that they hadn't spoken to Beyoncé in months, despite their once close bond. She's not the same, they told me. She's different. I do not know how to explain it. She's just not her anymore. Beyoncé's struggle was becoming more apparent with each passing day, but the people around her, those who depended on her success, those who benefited from her fame, did not want to see it. They did not want to acknowledge the truth, the horrifying reality that their superstar was being consumed by the very thing that had elevated her. Her team, her management, even the media. They all turned a blind eye to what was happening. They only saw the cash flow, the headlines, the influence. They did not care about the price Beyoncé was paying. They only cared about what she could give them. But I knew better now. I had seen the signs. I had heard the whispers. Beyoncé was no longer just an artist. She was a prisoner, locked in a battle with an entity she could never truly control. And every time she stepped onto that stage, every time she became Sasha, she lost a little more of herself. Jaguar had warned me. She had told me that this would happen. That Beyoncé's fame, her success, would eventually lead to her destruction. And now, as I watched her from the shadows, I could see the truth in her words. It was too late for Beyoncé. The deal had been made, and there was no going back. But as Beyoncé's identity slipped away, a new threat emerged. One that would push her even further into the grip of the entity she could not escape. I could no longer deny the truth that had been lurking beneath the surface for so long. Beyoncé was no longer the woman she once was. The fame, the success, the adoration from millions, they all came at a cost she could not have anticipated. But there was more. The entity controlling her, the force that had taken root in her life, was not simply a side effect of her success. It was growing, feeding off of her power, and every performance, every new milestone only made it stronger. Jaguar had warned me that the entity had always been there, lurking in the shadows of the music industry, preying on those who were desperate enough to make a deal. She had told me that Beyoncé was just one of many victims, but I had never truly understood what she meant until now. This was no ordinary force. This was an ancient being, a creature of darkness that thrived on the fame and energy of the artists it controlled, and Beyoncé had unwittingly given it access to her soul. The more I learned about this entity, the more I realized just how much control it had over her. It was not just the stage performances, the transformation into Sasha. It was everything. The way she lived, the way she interacted with people, the way her very essence seemed to change with every passing year. Beyoncé was slipping away, bit by bit, and in her place stood something else, something darker, something that existed only to serve the entity. At first, the transformation had seemed like a natural progression for an artist, an evolution of self, an expression of creativity. But now I saw it for what it truly was, a gradual descent into something horrifying. Beyoncé's true self was becoming lost, swallowed up by the force that had taken hold of her. It was not just a stage persona anymore. It was a parasite, feeding off her energy, her fame, her very soul. What terrified me most was the realization that Beyoncé had made this choice. She had agreed to the pact, to the deal with this entity, believing she could control it. But the more power she gained, the stronger the entity became. It fed on her success, it reveled in her adoration, and it twisted her into something unrecognizable. The transformation was not just physical, it was spiritual, emotional, psychological. The more Beyoncé gave, the more the entity took, and it was only a matter of time before there would be nothing left of her at all. I spoke to more people who had worked with Beyoncé over the years, trying to piece together the full picture of what had happened to her. One former choreographer who had been close to Beyoncé in her early years revealed something chilling. They had noticed the first signs of change shortly after Beyoncé's rise to stardom. At first, it was subtle, small differences in her personality, her behavior. But as the years went on, the changes became more apparent. The person they once knew, the woman who had been driven and grounded, was slowly being replaced by someone else. Someone who was harder, colder, more distant. The choreographer recalled a particular incident during a rehearsal. Beyoncé had been late, which was not unusual, but what was strange was how she arrived. She seemed completely out of sorts, disoriented, almost like she was in a trance. When asked if she was okay, Beyoncé had simply smiled and said, "I am fine, just tired." But there was something in her eyes, a hollowness, an emptiness, that sent a chill through the room. It was the first real sign that something was wrong, something beyond the pressure of fame and success. That was when the rumors began to circulate. People in her inner circle started to whisper about her changing behavior, about the way she seemed to disconnect from reality when she stepped off stage. They spoke about her coldness, her inability to relate to anyone, even those closest to her. It was as if she had become a shell of the woman she once was. But no one could say anything. No one could speak up. Beyoncé was an icon, a goddess in the eyes of her fans, and those around her depended on her success. They turned a blind eye, refusing to acknowledge the truth. They did not care about the toll her fame was taking. They did not care about the price she was paying. They only cared about the image, the brand, the product that Beyoncé had become. And that was the real tragedy. No one would ever speak the truth, not until it was too late. Beyoncé's soul was slowly being consumed, but everyone around her, her team, her fans, her family, remained silent, blind to the destruction that was unfolding right before their eyes. I began to understand what Jaguar had meant when she said Beyoncé could not escape. The entity had done more than just take a piece of her soul. It had possessed her. It had become a part of her, controlling her thoughts, her actions, her very being. The line between who she had once been and who she was becoming had blurred beyond recognition. And now, it was only a matter of time before there would be nothing left of the Beyoncé we all knew. The more I learned, the more the weight of the truth crushed me. I had uncovered something horrifying, something that no one was ready to accept. The Beyoncé we saw on stage was not the real Beyoncé. She had been replaced by something darker, something that had taken her place and was slowly destroying everything she had built. And the saddest part, no one could do anything about it. The deal had been made, and now the entity owned her. But what happened next shattered everything I thought I knew about control, and Beyoncé's descent into the entity's grip took a turn no one could have predicted. Beyoncé had never been a quitter. From the very beginning, she had fought for everything she had, every inch of fame, every ounce of success. She was a force of nature, someone who seemed invincible. But what I began to understand was that this strength was precisely what made her so vulnerable. The more determined she became to hold on to her career, her identity, the more she unknowingly fed the entity that had taken control of her life. I had heard whispers in the industry, rumors that Beyoncé was not the same person she had once been. But it was when I saw her in person again, after everything I had learned, that the truth became undeniable. There were moments when I could see the battle waging inside her, a war she could not win. Backstage, before a major performance, I saw her struggle with something that no one around her seemed to notice. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection with an intensity that was almost painful to watch. Her hands gripped the sides of the vanity, as if she were holding on to her very last shred of control. Her face, usually composed, was twisted in an expression of frustration and fear. She muttered something under her breath, something that sounded like a plea. "I just want to be me, just for a second." It hit me like a ton of bricks. Beyoncé was losing the fight. The persona that had once been her creation, her alter ego, was now the one controlling her. Sasha was no longer just a stage name. Sasha had become her, a permanent fixture in her life. And now, there was no going back. I watched as Beyoncé's eyes flickered, the momentary clarity giving way to the cold, distant gaze of Sasha. She straightened her posture, took a deep breath, and within seconds, the transformation was complete. The fear, the confusion, gone. In its place was the confident, commanding Beyoncé we all knew. The one who could command the stage, who could give the performance of a lifetime. But I knew, deep down, that the Beyoncé who stood before me was not the same person who had entered the room. And it was in that moment, as she walked out onto the stage, that I realized just how much she had lost. Every time she stepped into the spotlight, she stepped further away from the woman she had been. The entity that had taken hold of her was no longer content to play second fiddle. It had consumed her piece by piece until the very essence of who she was had been replaced by something else. But Beyoncé did not know this, or maybe she did, but the cost of success had already been paid. There was no turning back. Sasha was her now, and Beyoncé had become a mere shell, a vessel for the entity's power and influence. The woman who had once been so strong, so determined, was no longer in control. What was most terrifying was how normal this had all become. No one questioned it. No one saw the signs. To the public, to her fans, Beyoncé was still the icon they had always adored, the unstoppable, powerful force who could do no wrong. But behind the scenes, the reality was darker than anyone could have ever imagined. I'd spoken to people who had been close to her, and they all said the same thing. They had seen the change, but they had also accepted it. The fame, the fortune, the adoration, it was too much to give up. No one wanted to risk losing what they had. They stayed silent, ignored the subtle shifts in her behavior and her personality. They did not want to believe that the woman they had once known was slipping away, becoming something unrecognizable. The saddest part of it all was that Beyoncé did not know how to stop it. She could not turn back the clock, could not undo the pact she had made. Sasha had become a part of her, woven into the fabric of her existence. And now, every time she performed, every time she stepped onto that stage, she lost a little bit more of herself. She had fought for control, for her career, for her identity. But in the end, she had lost everything. The very thing that had made her a star had also been the thing that destroyed her. But as the transformation continued, something even darker started to emerge. And what Beyoncé thought she had lost, she had not even begun to understand. Beyoncé's descent had reached a point where even her most devoted followers could not deny it. The change in her was no longer subtle. It was glaring, undeniable, and yet the world remained oblivious. They saw the glitz, the glamour, the performances. They saw the woman they had adored for years. But what they did not see was the woman beneath it all, lost, trapped, and haunted by a force she could not escape. I spoke to a few more people who had been close to her in the earlier days of her career. They all said the same thing. Something had gone terribly wrong. They all recalled moments where Beyoncé seemed to be off, times when her personality shifted suddenly without warning. It was no longer just the act of becoming Sasha on stage. It had become a part of her life, creeping into every moment. She had begun to forget herself. One of her former bodyguards told me of an incident that still haunted him. He had been with Beyoncé during a trip overseas, a rare time when she was away from the spotlight without the pressure of performing. But even then, she had not been the same. He described a moment when, in the middle of the night, Beyoncé had come to him, her eyes wide, her voice shaking. She asked him to help her. "I cannot stop it," she had whispered. "I cannot control it anymore." But what could anyone do? The deal had already been made. The entity that had taken hold of Beyoncé was not a force that could be stopped by a bodyguard, by her family, or even by her own will. It had power, an ancient and insidious power, and it had consumed her bit by bit until she was no longer the person who had signed the pact. She had become something else, something unrecognizable. The entity had won. Sasha was no longer just an alter ego. Sasha was the dominant personality, and Beyoncé was fading into the background. In the rare moments when Beyoncé would show signs of the woman she once was, it was heartbreaking. There were times when she would look at herself in the mirror backstage, her expression one of sheer terror, as though she were staring into the face of her own demise. She would touch her own face as if trying to make sure she was still there, still herself. But in those moments, I could see the truth. She was already gone. The battle that Beyoncé fought, day after day, year after year, was a battle she had lost before she even understood what was at stake. She had thought she could keep control of the power that came with fame, but the power had consumed her. And now, as she stood before millions, singing and dancing with the same energy she had always had, she was not herself. Sasha was the one in control, and Beyoncé was merely a prisoner inside her own body. It was not just a transformation anymore. It was a curse that would never be broken. Beyoncé had paid the ultimate price for fame. The woman who had once stood before the world as a beacon of strength, power, and confidence was now nothing more than a vessel. Sasha had taken over, and there was nothing left of Beyoncé. Every time she stepped onto that stage, it was a reminder of what had been lost. A soul consumed by the very fame she had fought so hard to attain. The price of fame had become her undoing, and the world would never know the truth of what had really happened to the woman they once adored.